we saw just the other night, Separate But Equal, the movie, and there was a handsome guy portraying William Coleman before a group of Thurgood Marshall and fellow attorneys.
There are 9 key men. Peanut, why don't we get our new man to fill the gentleman in?
Bill Coleman clerked for Justice Frankfurter during the 1948 term. The first colored man ever chosen as clerk. He knows the justices. Bill, will you give the gentleman a sense of how the court stacks up?
Chief Justice Vinson. He plays poker 2 nights a week with President Truman. Some say he's better at setting major league batting averages than legal precedents. Vinson is a passive leader of a divided court. One result, less than half as many unanimous opinions this year as 10 years ago. Vinson relies heavily on legal precedents. He's reluctant to overturn established law. Tom Clark of Texas, conservative, votes with Vinson 90% of the time. His own state of Texas has 1,000 segregated schools. Justice Stanley Reed, Kentucky. In some ways, he's still a small-town Southern lawyer. Says he opposes discrimination against Negroes, but his solution could be equal schools, not desegregation. These 2 we can count on. William O. Douglas is the youngest member of the court, Hugo Black the oldest, the strongest defenders of individual liberties on the court. These 2 we have to work on, Jackson and Frankfurter. Robert Jackson was appointed to the court by Roosevelt in 1941. He's still upset that Truman passed him over when he made Vinson Chief Justice. Do you know what stare decisis means?
Yesterday's decision shall govern today's decision?
Exactly. Jackson believes that precedents are a force for stability. So, like a coral reef, the law becomes a structure of fossils. Felix Frankfurter, the finest intellect on the court. A Jew born in Europe. He knows discrimination. He used to say to us, how we feel is not important. It's the law that matters.
Did that happen? Where you, in fact, you sort of did a game plan of who what the justices were possibly thinking?
Well, there were times when we tried by reading a lot of their opinions, and a few of us had known some of them, to figure out how they would react and what's the best way to appeal to them. And you also, well, Mr. Marshall certainly felt that sometimes you lose a case because you say something the wrong way. And therefore, like this whole question of whether you're trying to integrate the school system or desegregate, well, we soon felt that desegregate made more sense than integrate. It didn't seem to be as much affirmative action that you were trying to take. And we were well aware that the mood of the country, after all, you had just not so long ago finished World War, and during that war most of the armed forces, certainly to the beginning of the Truman administration, were segregated. I kind of smiled today when they talked mainly about, well, it was a problem of the South, whereas you recognize that most major northern cities or a lot of places in the country were as segregated as the South. It may not be a statute which says you went in jail if you went someplace, but certainly there was as much segregation. But Marshall just called me one day. Well, see, when I was a law clerk, he had argued a couple of cases, and he saw me where the clerks sit, and so he just called me. Then it must have been about 8 months after I started working at Paul White, and said we're thinking about having an all-out attack on school segregation, and we'd like to come down and discuss it. And sometime in June. That must have been, that'd be about June 50 or 51. And I went down, and about 40 of us, Paul Fern was there, some other people there. And so that's how it started, and we finally selected where to file the cases, what to do. and that I would work with him at the night, the weekend, and we went two stories that I would be finished. One, the day we stayed at the Warman Park Hotel, which was a nice hotel, and so we got in the cab, and the guy takes us to the Supreme Court, and he says, when we got to the Supreme Court, he said, you know, when you gentlemen got in the cab, you never told me where you were going, but Mr. Marshall, I knew where you were to be, so that's how we got to court.
This was the argument day.
This is argument day, and it was the first argument, and we were so excited we didn't even mention it. The other one is about a week before the argument, no, about 2 weeks before the argument, and we were at the Warman Park Hotel every night, and along about 7 o'clock, this guy would knock on the door and bring us a cake. And the night before the argument, he comes back and he brings a cake and says, Mr. Marshall, can you get me a seat tomorrow in the court? Because I want to hear the argument. And of course, Mr. Marshall says, well, I don't know. After all, I got to get Walter White in. I got to get Roy Wilkins up here. I don't think I can. So the guy comes back about an hour later and says, that's all right, Mr. Marshall. You don't have to worry. So we get to court the next day. We're sitting there, and we have to look over, where the judge's guests sit. This guy sitting on the first row. It happens to be the Chief Justice's valet.
No.
And he was aware. I'm pretty sure Mrs. Warren had been making these cakes because they lived in Warman Park Hotel too, had been sending us these cakes every day. And I had that experience I had, which I always thought was kind of funny.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
great behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In retrospect, I think most people would say that somehow the court had to make a decision which would either outlaw racial segregation or at least put it greatly under suspect that the country was changing. You had television, you had everything, and I don't think that you could really say the United States could continue to survive. But today, knowing the problems that we still have in the society, though they're different, whether if certain things had been done in a different way then, would we be better off today? And that's something which is intriguing. The country certainly has improved. It's much better under almost any circumstances they indicated. But on the other hand, there's still a lot of problem, and I sometimes way knowing, for example, that with respect to women, well, women didn't get the right to vote until long after the 15th Amendment was passed. When I was law clerk to Justice Frankfurter, we wrote an opinion of Justice Frankfurter. I think the court decided 6-3 that a statute which says a woman couldn't work in a bar unless the bar was owned by her husband or father was constitutional. Obviously, today that statute would clearly be unconstitutional. And yet, and also knowing then that when I went to the Harvard Law School in 1941, that it was no women, and indeed, you couldn't even bring one in on a date on Saturday. And now, the dean of the Harvard Law School is a woman, right. And gradually, I would certainly say that the women have become lawyers, and you'll find many more of them in powerful positions in these major law firms than you do blacks. Well, under those circumstances, why the difference? Particularly when, if you look at it, women started after we did. I mean, after we, in theory, the 14th Amendment certainly applied to us even more than it did to women. But yet today, I would say the women have been more successful in trying to break down all the barriers than black men have.